She does not knock. She does not speak. She simply appears. At the end of a long corridor, at the foot of a cold staircase, in the window of a room that has been locked for 100 years. White dress, still hands, and eyes that carry the weight of something unforgivable. Welcome to the Old Ink Society. Tonight, we follow her, the White Lady phenomenon across Europe. Before we descend into the specific cases, the names, the castles, the centuries-old tragedies, I want you to consider something strange. Across the whole of Europe, in countries separated by language, religion, centuries of war, and wildly different cultures, one ghost keeps appearing. Not a demon, not a monster, not something ancient and inhuman. A woman, in white. In Germany, she drifts through the corridors of royal castles, appearing before the deaths of kings. In England, she rides headless through moonlit grounds, forever bound to the anniversary of her execution. In France, she wanders the halls of a great chateau, her face said to be hollow, her eyes a cold and terrible green. In the Czech lands, she moves through ancient stone, sometimes gentle, sometimes a harbinger of death, but always a woman in white. Folklore scholars call this a legend type, a recurring story structure that appears in multiple cultures, independently, because it speaks to something universal in the human psyche. The White Lady shares certain traits wherever she appears, and they are worth naming before we go any further. She is always a woman. The ghost almost never appears as a man. There is something specifically and deliberately feminine about this haunting. She wears white. In older European tradition, white was not a color of innocence. It was the color of burial shrouds. White was the color of the dead. She is connected to a place of status, a castle, a manor, a great house. The White Lady does not haunt ordinary homes. She belongs to the aristocratic world, a world of wealth, power, and the secrets that wealth and power tend to breed. She is connected to tragedy, murder, betrayal, an unhappy marriage, a love refused, a child lost. Somewhere in the backstory of every White Lady is a wound, something done to her or something she herself did, that left a mark so deep it could not be erased even by death. And this is what makes the White Lady different from, say, a simple ghost story. She is not just a dead person who refuses to leave. She is unresolved. She is grief that has not been given permission to end. Germany has perhaps the oldest and most formally documented White Lady tradition in Europe. The Weiße Frau, the White Woman, appears across multiple noble houses and royal lines, and her appearance was not merely frightening. It was prophetic. England gave the legend some of its most famous faces. Here, the White Lady is often a named historical figure, not an anonymous spirit, but someone whose story the culture already knew and mourned. The ghost becomes an extension of history itself. France wove the White Lady into the stone of its great chateau. Those magnificent, often blood-soaked houses of the nobility. Behind the gilded facades of French aristocratic life lay extraordinary violence, and the White Lady is its aftermath. and the Czech lands, Bohemia in particular, have a rich tradition of white ladies who move through castle corridors as something between omen and echo, guardians of a house's hidden shame. These are not separate stories. They are the same story, told in different languages, wearing different names. And the question we will return to before this night is done is, why? Why does she keep appearing? What does she want? What does she represent? But first, let us go to the castles. Let us find her. The White Lady of Hohenzollern Castle, Germany. We begin in Germany. We begin at the top of a hill in the Swabian Alps, where a castle has stood since the 11th century, and where the most famous, the most formally documented, the most politically significant white lady in all of Europe has been seen, again and again, for over 600 years. Hohenzollern Castle, home of the Hohenzollern dynasty, the royal house that produced the kings of Prussia, the house that gave Germany its emperors, the house that, when the White Lady walked its halls, would find itself counting its dead. Her name, according to the oldest accounts, is Kunigunde of Orlamunde, a noblewoman of the 14th century, a woman of high birth and considerable beauty, and, if the legend is to be believed, of an appetite for love that ultimately destroyed her. Kunigunde was widowed, and in her widowhood she fell into love, or what she understood as love, with Albert of Nuremberg, a Hohenzollern man, a man of ambition and careful heart. She wished to marry him. By all accounts, she pursued this wish with the kind of determination that the world rarely forgives in women. Albert reportedly told her that they could not marry, that there were, and here the language becomes cold and measured and devastating, 4 eyes standing between them, 4 eyes that belonged to children, his and hers. Kunigunde, the legend tells us, misunderstood him, or understood him all too well. She had 2 children of her own, and she killed them. She believed, the story insists she believed, that removing the obstacle of her children would clear the way to Albert's heart, that if the 4 eyes were gone, love could finally enter. Albert, horrified, rejected her utterly, and Kunigunde, carrying the weight of what she had done, the unthinkable thing, the irrevocable thing, entered a convent. She lived out the rest of her life behind those walls. But her grief, it seems, did not stay there when she died. The earliest recorded accounts of a woman in white moving through Hohenzollern Castle date from the 15th century. She is described as silent, not threatening in her manner, but deeply, terribly present. Servants reported seeing her in corridors at night, drifting between rooms, her dress pale in the darkness. And then something happened that transformed this from a ghost story into something larger. People began to notice that she appeared before death. Specifically, and this is the detail that caused the Hohenzollern White Lady to be taken seriously, not just by frightened servants, but by the nobility themselves. She appeared before the deaths of members of the royal family. She was seen before the death of Frederick the Great, one of the most celebrated monarchs of the 18th century, a man of reason and philosophy who famously had no patience for superstition. And yet, the accounts persist. The White Lady walked Hohenzollern before he died. She was seen before the death of Kaiser Wilhelm I, the first emperor of a unified Germany. The death of a dynasty made flesh. She became known as the Todesbote, the death messenger, a harbinger, not evil exactly, not malicious in her warning, but inevitable. When she appeared, someone of the blood would not see the year's end. What to make of Kunigunde? I want to stay with her story for a moment because I find it genuinely troubling. And I mean that in the way that all truly good ghost stories should trouble us. If we take the legend at face value, Kunigunde is a woman who committed the worst act imaginable, driven by a love that was not returned. She is a figure of absolute tragedy. The wrong person, the wrong moment, the wrong reading of a careless phrase. If he had only been clearer, if she had only waited, if someone, anyone, had intervened. Instead, a convent, a lifetime of penance, and then centuries of restless wandering through the halls of the family she had hoped to join. She never became a Hohenzollern in life, but she is, in some uncanny way, inseparable from them in death. There are historians who argue that the legend of Kunigunde was largely constructed, that the later Hohenzollern family attached the White Lady to an obscure noblewoman's name in order to give their haunting a specific, explicable origin. A ghost needs a story. A story needs a name. Perhaps. History is full of ghosts that were invented to explain something that was already being seen. But whether Kunigunde ever walked those halls in life, something has walked them in death. The sightings are too numerous, too consistent, too spread across too many centuries to dismiss as mere invention. The White Lady of Blickling Hall, England. We cross the English Channel now. We leave the Alpine castles of Germany and arrive in Norfolk, flat, grey and windswept, in the county of East Anglia, where a great Jacobean manor house stands behind iron gates and century-old yew hedges. Blickling Hall. And here, the White Lady has a name that needs no introduction. Anne Boleyn, the woman behind the legend. If you have encountered the name before, and most of you will have, you know the outlines of the story. Second wife of Henry VIII, Queen of England for a little over 1,000 days, mother of the future, Queen Elizabeth I, and on the 19th of May, 1536, executed on Tower Green on charges of adultery, incest, and high treason, charges that most modern historians believe were fabricated. She was 28 years old or thereabouts. She placed her head on the block, and history, which had been watching her for a decade, looked away. Blickling Hall is believed to have been built, at least in part, on the site of an older house, one that may have been the Boleyn family home. Anne herself may have been born here, although historians debate this. What is certain is that Blickling is associated with her memory and has been for a very long time. And every year, on the 19th of May, the anniversary of her execution, something comes back. Witnesses over the centuries have described the same vision. A carriage appears at the gates of Blickling Hall at midnight. It is drawn by 4 black horses, and the horses have no eyes, their sockets said to be dark and hollow. The coachman sits atop the box, but he is spectral, barely solid, hunched against a wind that no one else seems to feel. And inside the carriage, visible through the window, dressed in white, sits Anne Boleyn. She holds her head in her lap. The carriage races up the long drive towards the hall, picking up impossible speed, and then, at the door, or somewhere near it, it vanishes. No sound, no after-image, simply gone. Witnesses report feeling cold, feeling watched, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes, hearing something that might be weeping, or might be wind, trailing behind the carriage as it goes. Why the Victorians loved her. The ghost of Anne Boleyn became particularly famous in the Victorian era, and I think this tells us something important. Not about ghosts, but about the people who love ghost stories. The Victorians were obsessed with what we might call the twice-wronged woman. A woman who was wronged in life, betrayed, discarded, punished for desires and ambitions that would have been celebrated in a man, and then denied even the dignity of rest in death. Anne Boleyn was the perfect candidate. She had been powerful. She had been brilliant by all accounts, sharp-tongued, politically astute, a reader and a thinker in an age that preferred its queens silent and decorative. She had risen to the very top of English society on the strength of her wit and her refusal to simply capitulate. And Henry had destroyed her. He had not merely discarded her. He had killed her. And not cleanly, not privately. He had put her on trial in front of the court she had reigned over, allowed her to be accused of monstrous things she almost certainly did not do, and then sent her to the block with a formality that was somehow worse than passion. The Victorians understood this. They wrote about it in their ghost story collections. They painted it. They dramatized it. The headless Anne in her white dress, returning year after year to the home of her childhood, or what they chose to believe was her childhood home, was a story that meant something to them. It meant, we have not forgotten. We remember what was done. And perhaps, in some deep place where reason doesn't reach, we believe that she does too. Anne Boleyn, if she returns to Blickling, does not return in triumph. She returns in the form in which she died, incomplete, severed, carrying the evidence of her murder in her own hands. It is, when you sit with it, one of the most devastating images in all of English folklore. The White Lady of Château de Brissac, France. We move now to France, to the Loire Valley, where the earth is rich and green, and the chateaux rise from the landscape like something that should belong to dreams. This is the heartland of French aristocratic power, a corridor of extraordinary beauty that is also, if you look closely, a landscape saturated with old violence. Château de Brissac, the tallest castle in France, 7 stories, 204 rooms, and somewhere within its magnificent walls, a woman who has been dead for over 500 years and has not, apparently, been persuaded to leave. Her name is Charlotte de Brissac. Also, the tradition holds, though it is worth noting, as we go on, that the historical record around this particular ghost is more tangled than in our previous cases. What we have is a story, and the story goes like this. Charlotte was the wife of Jacques de Brissac, a powerful and well-connected nobleman of the 15th century. Jacques was a man who moved in the high circles of the French court. Charlotte was a woman who, whatever her other qualities, was unhappy in her marriage. She took a lover, a courtier, a man of the court whose name the story has not bothered to preserve, because he is not the point of this legend. He is merely the instrument of the catastrophe. One night, Jacques de Brissac came home earlier than expected, or quietly, or with suspicion already burning in him. The accounts vary. What all of them agree on is what he found. He killed them both. Not in a moment of blind passion, or, if it was a passion that extended long enough to be thorough. Charlotte and her lover died in the chateau, and Jacques de Brissac, rather than facing the consequences that might have followed, used his considerable political connections to ensure that the matter was handled quietly. He received a pardon. He remarried. History moved on. But Charlotte did not. Shortly after the deaths, the servants of Château de Brissac began to report something in the corridors at night. A figure in white, moving slowly through the great rooms, through the long galleries, through the chambers of a house that should have been sleeping. She was described from the beginning as slightly wrong. Her face, and this detail recurs across multiple accounts, was not quite right. Hollow, some said, as if the skin were there but something essential behind it was missing. And her eyes glowed, witnesses insisted, a cold and eerie green, not the green of living things, the green of something preserved in cold water or seen through thick glass. This is why she is sometimes called not the White Lady, but the Green Lady, though she belongs absolutely to the White Lady tradition. The white of her dress is always mentioned. The green belongs only to her face. Modern visitors to Château de Brissac, and it is still inhabited, still owned by descendants of the de Brissac family, still open to tourists, report hearing moaning at night in the upper floors, footsteps in empty corridors, a sense of being watched from doorways where no one stands. Some have reported seeing her directly, the white figure moving through the darkness, always at a distance, always disappearing before she can be properly seen. What I find most extraordinary about Château de Brissac is not the ghost herself. It is the fact that the family still lives there. The Brissac family, who have owned the chateau for centuries, have spoken openly about the haunting. They have not fled. They have not sealed the upper floors. They have accommodated Charlotte into the life of the house in the way that very old families sometimes accommodate very old problems. With a certain resigned elegance. She is part of the house. She has always been part of the house. To pretend she is not there would be, at this point, rather rude. There is something in that attitude that I find deeply French. A willingness to live alongside history, even when history is disturbing, even when history walks the corridors at night with hollow eyes. Why the White Lady appears everywhere. We have visited 3 castles. We have met 3 women. One who committed an unthinkable act in the name of love. One who was executed on charges the world has spent 5 centuries doubting. One who was murdered by a husband who walked free. 3 different countries, 3 different centuries, 3 different stories, and yet the same ghost. I want to offer you not an explanation, because I am not certain explanations are what ghost stories deserve, but a way of thinking about this, a framework that might help us understand why the White Lady keeps returning across cultures, across centuries, across the whole breadth of the European imagination. Every White Lady story is built around guilt, specifically, guilt that has not been named, acknowledged, or punished. In the case of Kunigunde, the guilt is her own. She carries it so heavily that she cannot lay it down, even in death. In the case of Anne Boleyn, the guilt belongs to others, to Henry, to the court, to history, and she returns as a living accusation. In the case of Charlotte de Brissac, the guilt belongs to Jacques, who was pardoned, who remarried, who apparently lived a perfectly ordinary life, while she wandered the corridors of the house where he killed her. Guilt that goes unaddressed does not disappear. The White Lady knows this. She is, in some sense, the physical embodiment of that principle. Then there is betrayal. Every White Lady has been betrayed by a lover, by a husband, by a justice system, by the social structures that promised to protect her and then turned against her. Betrayal by institutions, betrayal by individuals, betrayal by the very world she had been taught to trust. The white dress matters here. She wears the color of her innocence, or her victimhood, or her death. She makes herself visible in the color of the beginning, even as she haunts the ending. These are the stories of tragic women, women whose lives were defined by the decisions of men, and whose deaths became the only moment in which they were allowed to make themselves undeniable. The White Lady cannot be silenced. She cannot be dismissed. She cannot be locked away. She walks where she walks, and she stays as long as she stays. And then there are the aristocratic secrets. The White Lady is always associated with wealth, with power, with great houses. This is not incidental. The great houses of Europe, the castles, the chateaux, the manors, were places where enormous things happened behind closed doors. Marriages made for political advantage, affairs conducted in secret, children born to the wrong father, women killed by husbands who had enough connections to survive the inconvenience of their own crimes. The White Lady is the secret that the house cannot keep. She is what happens when a story is buried too deep and refuses to stay buried. The Victorian era is when most of the White Lady legends received their most enduring literary form. And this is no accident. The Victorians were obsessed with the hidden cost of power. Their literature, from the ghost stories to the sensation novels to the great social realist works, returns again and again to the same question. What is the price of all this? What has been done, and to whom, to produce this world of wealth and order and progress? The White Lady answered them. She walked out of the walls of the great houses and said, "Here is the price. Here she is. Look at her." Victorian readers responded with a particular intensity of people who recognized something they had been trying not to think about. The collections of ghost stories that proliferated in the 19th century are full of white ladies, some drawn directly from older folklore, some newly invented in the older tradition. They were read aloud by lamplight, in the very kinds of grand houses where such legends were said to originate. The White Lady was always in the room, whether anyone admitted it or not. Psychology versus the supernatural. I always find it useful, in these investigations, to spend a moment with a skeptical view, not because I think it settles anything. Ghost stories have a way of outlasting every rational explanation offered for them, but because the explanations themselves are often fascinating. Grief hallucinations are, it turns out, extraordinarily common. The bereaved see the people they have lost, they hear them, they feel their presence in rooms they once occupied. This is not pathology. This is a well-documented feature of human grief, one that appears across cultures and throughout history. A house in which someone died violently is a house in which the remaining inhabitants are almost certainly experiencing profound trauma. Trauma can produce visions. The mind, under extreme pressure, offers the eye what the eye expects to see. Candlelight illusions are worth considering for the older sightings specifically. Before electricity, the great houses of Europe were lit almost entirely by candles and firelight. Candles produce a flickering, unreliable light that creates moving shadows, suggests shapes in doorways, makes pale fabrics seem to glow. A pale dress left hanging in a corridor would, in candlelight, bear a passing resemblance to a figure. The figure, seen at the edge of vision and lit from an uncertain angle, becomes a woman. Folklore repetition is perhaps the most powerful mechanism of all. Once a story exists, once a house is known to be haunted, once the legend is in circulation, subsequent witnesses interpret their experiences through the framework the legend provides. You do not simply see something you cannot explain. You see the White Lady because you know she is here, and your mind obligingly provides the details. And then there is psychological suggestion. The houses in which White Ladies appear are, almost uniformly, places with dark histories. People who visit them often know that history. They have read it, been told it, absorbed it from the atmosphere of the place itself. A house where a woman was murdered is a house that feels different. It carries something. Not a ghost, perhaps, but something. And that something shapes what we see, what we hear, what we think we experience. These are good explanations, serious explanations, explanations that deserve to be taken seriously by anyone who thinks carefully about what we know of the human mind and its extraordinary capacity to construct experience. And yet, the White Lady persists. She persists across centuries during which every one of these explanations has been available. People who knew about grief hallucinations still saw her. People who understood the effects of candlelight still saw her. People who were fully aware of the power of suggestion still saw her and were frightened and told others, who told others still. I am not, in the end, going to tell you what to believe. That is not why we are here. We are here because the story matters, because something in us reaches toward it, because it says something true about grief and guilt and the things we cannot bury deep enough. The White Lady may be a hallucination. She may be a construction of folklore. She may be, as the rationalists insist, nothing more than the mind's attempt to give shape to formless dread. Or she may be exactly what she appears to be. A woman who is not finished. A woman who is still waiting for someone to understand. Perhaps the White Lady was never merely a ghost. Perhaps she was a memory, wandering the halls of history. Consider what she has witnessed across her centuries of wandering: the rise and fall of royal houses, the burning of old ways and the building of new ones, wars and peace treaties and revolutions. The corridors she walks have seen coronations and conspiracies, weddings and murders, the whole tumbling human story of ambition and love and loss. And through all of it, she walks. She does not change. She does not age. She does not adapt to the century. She wears the same dress. She carries the same grief. She appears in the same doorways, at the same moments, before the same kinds of losses. There is something almost consoling in that, if you allow yourself to feel it. The world changes constantly. It has always changed constantly, and the pace seems only to quicken with each generation. Everything familiar becomes unfamiliar. Everything solid becomes uncertain. But she remains. Think of Kunigunde, standing at the window of a castle that has outlasted every king who ever claimed it. Think of Anne, returning to Norfolk on a May night when the air smells of blossoms and cold earth. Think of Charlotte moving through the rooms of the house that was both her home and her tomb. They are not suffering, or if they are, it is a suffering so old it has become indistinguishable from presence. They are simply there, as they have always been there, as they will, perhaps, always be there. The great houses of Europe stand in various states of preservation and ruin. Some have been opened to tourists. Some have been converted into hotels. Some have crumbled into the earth they were built upon. But the stories in them endure, the names endure, and the women in white endure. History, when it cannot be resolved, simply refuses to conclude. If you find yourself someday in a great house late at night, if you find yourself walking a corridor that feels longer than it should, where the air is cooler than it has any right to be, where you sense at the very edge of vision a whiteness that may be a curtain or a reflection or something else entirely, do not be afraid. She has been here far longer than you have, and she's not interested in frightening you. She only wants to be remembered. Thank you for spending this night with the Old Ink Society. If you found something here worth returning to, consider subscribing. We will be here in the quiet hours when the rest of the world is sleeping.